When a single dad offers to clean up after a wild mansion party, he doesn't expect the hostess to be a billionaire to invite him and his daughter to stay. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The night air was thick with summer heat, the kind that clung to your skin and turned pillowcases damp. Daniel Brooks rolled over in bed for the third time, one arm draped over his eyes, willing the pounding bass to stop rattling his windows. The music wasn't just loud, it was thunderous, rolling in waves from the mansion next door like a private concert no one in the neighborhood had asked for. Through the thin walls of their small two-bedroom house, he could hear the dull thump of footsteps, laughter, and the occasional clink of glass. Party noises, expensive ones, by the sound of it. He sighed and sat up, running a hand through his hair, still smelling faintly of engine grease. 10 hours on the garage floor today, then another 2 trying to fix the washing machine that had chosen this week to give up. He rubbed the back of his neck and listened. The song changed. The beat didn't. "Daddy?" The small voice came from the hallway. Daniel got up and opened his bedroom door to find Sophie standing there in her unicorn pajamas, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. Her blonde hair was a tousled mess, and her eyes, though sleepy, were wide and restless. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "The music's too loud." He crouched down in front of her, smoothing her hair back. "I know, sweetheart. I hear it too." "Is it another wedding?" she asked, rubbing one eye. "Nope, just a party. Probably the new neighbor. They're not very nice if they play music when everyone's trying to sleep," she mumbled. Daniel gave a tired smile. "No, they're not." He stood and took her hand. "Come on, let's try the couch. Might be a little quieter downstairs." They made their way to the living room, the party still humming through the walls. Sophie curled up on his lap, her head resting against his chest, and Daniel stared out the window toward the mansion. Strings of lights danced behind the trees, laughter echoing into the night. Whoever had moved in over there lived a very different life. One with champagne and silk dresses and loud music that didn't care who was listening. Daniel closed his eyes, holding Sophie a little tighter, and waited for the night to end. The morning sun peeked over the trees, casting soft gold across the neighborhood as birds chirped their way into a new day. Daniel Brooks stood on his porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand, wearing the same faded gray t-shirt he always reached for when he knew the day would be long. He squinted toward the house next door, the mansion. Last night's party had gone well past midnight, and even now faint music still hummed like an afterthought. But it wasn't the noise that held his attention. It was the yard. The once manicured lawn was a battlefield. Red plastic cups dotted the grass like confetti, beer bottles nestled among flower beds, and half-eaten plates of catered food lay abandoned on patio tables. Someone's shoe, just one, sat upside down on the walkway, like it had given up halfway through the night. Daniel sighed. Hard. He took another sip of coffee, then looked down at the porch where Sophie's light-up sneakers were neatly lined up next to his boots. She was still asleep inside, curled up on the couch, where they'd both eventually dozed off. He hadn't wanted to carry her upstairs, not when the thumping music still echoed in her dreams. He set his mug down on the rail, grabbed an empty trash bag from the hallway closet, and made his way next door. He didn't plan on doing anything about it, not really. But standing there, seeing the mess, knowing someone's careless night was now everyone else's morning, he couldn't just leave it. He started with the bottles, careful not to cut himself. Then came the crumpled napkins, pizza crusts, shattered glass. The gate to the estate was ajar, as if even the house itself was too tired to keep people out. No one came to stop him. No one offered to help. As he worked, the sun climbed higher, sweat beginning to gather along the back of his neck. The mansion loomed quiet and still, its windows reflecting the morning sky like eyes refusing to make contact. Daniel wasn't looking for thanks. He just didn't like waking up to a world someone else didn't care enough to clean. Somewhere between the fifth beer bottle and the soggy paper plate, Daniel felt the sensation of being watched. He straightened, back protesting from bending over too long, and glanced toward the massive wraparound balcony that overlooked the lawn. There she was barefoot, arms folded, and wearing what looked like a $1,000 version of sleepwear. Pale silk pajamas clung to her tall frame, and a messy bun sat at the top of her head like a crown hastily assembled. She wasn't trying to hide. She just stood there, staring, like she'd forgotten how people were supposed to act in the morning. Their eyes met. Daniel gave a polite nod. Nothing more. He didn't stop working. He reached for another cup, dropped it into the trash bag, and kept going. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice still scratchy with sleep but layered with something sharper confusion. "Maybe." Daniel turned. "Morning." She took a few steps closer to the edge of the balcony, wrapping her arms tighter across her chest. "What are you doing?" He glanced at the trash bag, then back at her. "Cleaning." "I can see that," she replied, frowning slightly. "But why?" Daniel paused. "Fair question. Reasonable, even." He shrugged. "Figured someone ought to." The woman looked around as if seeing the aftermath for the first time. Her nose crinkled at a plate of shrimp skewers now occupied by ants. "I didn't ask anyone to." "I know," Daniel said, cutting her off gently. "Don't worry. I'm not expecting a thank you." She blinked, clearly unused to people not needing something from her. "But do I know you?" "Nope," he said simply, tying off the first full trash bag and starting another. "I live next door. You kept my daughter up last night." Her expression shifted. She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again. Guilt? Embarrassment? Maybe both. "I didn't realize it was that loud," she said after a pause. Daniel gave a half smile, not unkind. Loud enough. She stayed there, barefoot and uncertain, watching him like a puzzle she hadn't expected to find on her doorstep, and Daniel just kept cleaning. Alina padded down the stone steps. Cautious, but curious. Her silk pajama pants fluttering in the breeze. The cool concrete made her wince, but she didn't go back for shoes. She couldn't stop watching him, this man, with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor, who was cleaning up her mess like it belonged to him. He was crouched near the hedge, now, fishing out what looked like a champagne bottle lodged in the bushes. She stopped a few feet away, folding her arms as if that might give her some authority back. "You really don't have to do this," she said. Daniel looked up, eyes shaded by the morning sun. "I know. Then why are you?" He stood slowly, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "Because it needed doing." She let out a breath, equal parts frustrated and intrigued. "But you don't even know me," he smiled faintly. "That's usually how helping someone works." That answer stopped her cold. For a moment, all she could do was study him, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen long days and kept its mouth shut about them. His shirt was a little too worn, his boots scuffed, but there was a steadiness in the way he stood, like the ground was his to hold. "I should be the one doing this," she said quietly. "Maybe," he said, not unkindly. "But you didn't, and I'm already here." She flushed. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of control. It was supposed to be just a few friends." Daniel gave a noncommittal shrug and bent to grab another cup. "That's how these things usually start." She hesitated. "Look, I feel like I should pay you, or something." "No need." He didn't even look up. Alina stared at him, unsure what to make of someone who neither flattered her nor feared her. "You always help strangers for free?" "Only the ones who leave shrimp skewers in the flower beds," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. She laughed, surprised by the sound of Itan for the first time in a long while. It felt real. "Fair enough," she murmured, still watching him like she wasn't ready to stop. The trash bag was nearly full again when Alina reappeared, this time holding 2 mismatched mugs, steam curling above them in lazy spirals. She still hadn't changed out of her silk pajamas, but she'd pulled a knit sweater over the top, sleeves pushed past her elbows. The sight of her designer fabric and bed hair balancing mugs like peace offerings was almost comical. "Coffee?" she offered, stepping carefully onto the dewy grass. Daniel paused, glancing up from where he was digging a plastic fork out of the flower bed. "You? Trying to bribe me?" Her lips quirked. Maybe just trying to even the score. He studied her for a beat, then stood and took the mug she extended. The ceramic was warm, the kind of hand-thrown pottery that probably cost more than his car insurance. He nodded in thanks and took a sip. Strong, black, and surprisingly good. "I didn't expect you to still be out here," she said, watching him. "Mess isn't gone yet," Daniel replied. "Didn't seem right to stop halfway." She tilted her head. "You're not exactly what I pictured when I moved in." He gave her a look. "What did you picture?" "Lawn signs. Hoa complaints. Maybe a fruit basket laced with passive aggression." Daniel chuckled, the sound low and unforced. "Not really a fruit basket guy." "I'm starting to see that." She took a sip of her own coffee and added, "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Daniel shook his head. "Should I?" Alina blinked. "Most people do. Most people probably spend more time online than under car hoods." Something about that answer made her laugh again, soft, surprised, like she wasn't sure she remembered how. "I'm Alina Mercer." The name didn't land. He just nodded politely. "Daniel Brooks." They stood in a brief silence, the early morning quiet slowly returning to the lawn. Somewhere, a sprinkler sputtered to life. "Well, Daniel Brooks," she said, shifting her weight, "how do you feel about taking a break?" He looked down at the garbage bag, then back up at her. "You mean now?" "I mean," she said, raising her mug, "it's not every day someone shows up and fixes a mess they didn't make. You've earned 5 quiet minutes, with caffeine." Daniel considered her. Then, slowly, he raised his mug in return. "I guess I can spare 5. The garden was a mess, wild and overgrown, like nature had started to take back what once was carefully designed. Ivy choked the wrought iron trellises, flower beds had been overrun by weeds, and a cracked fountain in the center sat dry and forgotten. Daniel stood at the edge of it all, coffee in hand, as Alina stepped beside him. "I used to play here," she said quietly, "when I was a kid, before the house became more museum than home." Daniel glanced at her, then back at the tangle of green and brown. Still beautiful, underneath. "Like most things," she said with a wry smile. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting patches of gold across the stone paths. It was quieter than the rest of the house. No music, no echoes of last night's party. Just the faint rustle of wind in the hedges and the distant hum of sprinklers. "I was thinking," she said, her voice more hesitant now. "This place needs work, a lot of it. I don't know where to start. And, honestly, I don't trust half the people who say they want to help me. But you," he looked over, waiting, "you don't treat me like I'm someone you want something from," she continued. "Which is exactly why I want to ask you for something." Daniel raised a brow, silent. "I want to bring this garden back to life," she said, motioning toward the overgrowth. "But not with a team of contractors or some glossy Pinterest plan. I want to do it the right way, with someone real." He crossed his arms. "You offering me a job?" "In a way." She turned to face him fully. "There's a guest house behind the east wing. It's empty, needs a little cleaning up, but it's nice. If you and Sophie want to stay there, I'll cover the rent. In exchange, you help me restore this place." Daniel stared at her, surprised. "That's a big ask." "And a big offer," she replied. He looked back at the garden. It did have potential. And maybe, just maybe, so did this strange invitation from the woman who was no longer quite a stranger. "I'll think about it," he said. "Fair enough," she replied. But her eyes were already hopeful. Daniel sat at the tiny kitchen table, staring down at the slip of paper in his hand, Alina's offer, hastily written in neat, confident handwriting on a torn sheet of notepad paper. Guest house, garden restoration, rent-free. It sounded too good. People like him didn't get handed opportunities like this, not without fine print or strings knotted tight enough to strangle. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. "Dad?" Sophie peeked around the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching a bowl of dry cereal in one hand and her bunny in the other. "You've been sitting there forever." Daniel offered a tired smile. "Just thinking," She set the bowl down on the table, climbed into the chair across from him, and dangled her legs over the side like she always did. "About the big house?" He nodded. "Alina offered for us to stay in the guest house, just while I help fix up the garden." Sophie's eyes lit up like he'd just said, "Disney World," she gasped. "We'd live there?" "Well, kind of. It's not permanent. But there's a swing set, and a fountain, and a window with a seat in it. I saw it from the car." She leaned forward. "It's like a castle, Daddy." Daniel chuckled. "It's just a house, Soph." "It's not just a house, it's magic." He paused, watching her face so bright and full of that fearless wonder only kids seem allowed to carry. It made his stomach twist, that feeling of not wanting to disappoint her, of knowing how easily hope can be broken. "She's a stranger," he said softly. "We don't really know her." Sophie tilted her head. "But she gave you coffee, and she said sorry about the noise. And she smiled at me. That's 3 nice things." "That's your math?" he teased. She grinned. 3 nice things equals not a bad person." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision still heavy. But Sophie was already on her feet, spinning in a slow circle, pretending to be a princess in a ballroom. "I could help plant flowers," she said dreamily. "Or feed birds. Or name the garden paths." Daniel watched her twirl, and for the first time that morning, he let himself imagine it too. Maybe this was her new adventure. Maybe it could be his too. The guest house smelled faintly of cedar and dust, like something left untouched for too long but still holding its shape. Daniel stepped inside first, pushing the door open with a gentle nudge of his shoulder, a duffel bag slung over one arm. Sophie trailed behind him, her eyes wide as she took in every corner, peeking into each room, like she was exploring a secret hideout. Alina stood by the entryway, arms crossed, but not coldly. More like someone trying to be clear without being unkind. "I had it cleaned yesterday," she said, her voice steady. "The linens are fresh, the kitchen's stocked with basics, and the water heater takes a minute to warm up." Daniel nodded, glancing around the cozy, space-modest, compared to the mansion, but still bigger than their old apartment. Bright windows, hardwood floors, a little fireplace in the corner. It felt safe. "Appreciate it," he said. Alina hesitated before speaking again. "There are a few things I want to be upfront about." He turned to face her. "All right." Her gaze flicked to Sophie, who was now spinning in circles in the middle of the living room, arms out like she could fly. Alina waited until Sophie was a little more distracted, then continued. "First, no photos, of the house, the grounds, or me. I don't do press, and I don't want to start now." Daniel didn't flinch. "Understood." "Second, no gossip. About me. About this place. If people ask why you're here, tell them the truth or tell them nothing. I don't care, as long as it stays out of headlines." He raised an eyebrow. "Not planning to write a blog, if that's what you're worried about." A faint smile touched her lips, but only for a second. "Last thing. I don't talk about my family, especially my father. That's not part of this arrangement." Daniel nodded slowly. "Your business is yours." Alina let out a breath, like she'd been bracing for pushback that never came. "Good," she said. "Then we're clear." "We are." She looked around the small home, her voice softening. "I hope it's enough for now." Daniel looked toward Sophie, who was now pretending to sweep imaginary dust with an old broom. "It's more than enough," he said. The first few days in the guest house passed like a strange dream Daniel wasn't sure he'd woken from. Every morning, sunlight streamed through tall windows that actually opened without sticking. The air carried the scent of blooming lavender from somewhere nearby. And Sophie, without fail, woke up humming. She'd claimed the smaller bedroom instantly, arranging her few stuffed animals in a neat row along the windowsill, as if they too needed a view. She painted pictures at the kitchen table, talked to the hummingbirds that flitted past the porch, and narrated her pretend garden adventures like she was in a movie. Daniel, on the other hand, moved slower. Cautious. Grateful, yes, but cautious. He unpacked what little they had, a handful of clothes, some framed photos of Sophie's mom, and a coffee mug chipped on the handle that he refused to throw out. He kept things tidy, out of habit and principle, and made repairs here and there without being asked. A squeaky cabinet hinge, a loose porch step, a wobbly doorknob. No fanfare, just quiet fixes. Each evening after dinner, he sat on the porch with a worn paperback in his hand and his thoughts running laps. Sophie would curl up beside him with her drawing pad, occasionally pointing out birds or cloud shapes, but mostly just content to be near. He hadn't seen much of Alina. She stayed inside the main house mostly. Once or twice he caught glimpses of her through the trees, pacing on her balcony, or speaking into a phone with an expression that didn't match the garden's peace. When they did cross paths, she was polite, even warm, but always wrapped in an air of distances, if afraid to let anything get too close. Daniel didn't mind the quiet. He liked it. Preferred it even. Still, part of him kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the favor to be called in, for the balance to shift and reveal the catch he hadn't yet seen. Until then, he kept to his routine. Care for Sophie, fix what needed fixing, and treat the quiet like a gift, even if he didn't quite trust how long it would last. Daniel stepped through the iron archway at the edge of the estate's garden, a pair of worn work gloves tucked in his back pocket and a small notebook in hand. The garden stretched before him like a half-remembered dream-winding stone paths lost beneath creeping vines, rusted benches swallowed by ivy, and flower beds overtaken by stubborn weeds. It hadn't just been neglected, it had been forgotten. He crouched beside what once must have been a rose bed, now tangled with brambles and dandelions. His fingers gently parted the thicket, and sure enough, there they were, tiny buds, struggling beneath the mess, still trying to bloom. Something about it made his chest ache a little. For the next hour, he wandered. Not working yet, just walking, observing, listening. The garden was silent, save for the chirp of birds and the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting through the branches. It had a wildness to it, yes, but also a quiet, stubborn beauty, like it was waiting for someone to remember what it had once been. Daniel ran his hand along the weather-worn back of a stone bench, its edges softened by time. Moss clung to the seat, and a crack split the middle, but he could still picture someone sitting there, reading, dreaming, hoping. In the far corner, nearly hidden beneath a tangle of vines, he found a small iron gate, half open, creaking gently in the breeze. Beyond it was a circular clearing, overrun with weeds, but in the center stood a fountain, cracked, dry, but elegant in its own right, 3 tiers of stone carved with vines and lilies, now chipped and dusted with moss. He stepped closer, ran a finger along the rim. Someone had loved this place once. Behind him, a soft voice broke the silence. "I used to call that the heart." He turned. Alina stood a few feet away, her hair pulled into a low bun, her expression unreadable. She didn't look like the woman from the party, or the one in designer pajamas. Here, among the decay, she looked honest. "It was my mother's favorite spot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel nodded slowly. "It's still beating, just buried." Alina looked at him for a long moment, then quietly she said, "Maybe it's time we brought it back." By the 3rd day, Alina was there waiting. Daniel didn't say anything when he spotted her already seated on the cracked stone bench beneath the overgrown arbor, legs crossed, notebook in hand, looking entirely out of place in linen pants and spotless sneakers. But something about her posture relaxed, thoughtful, kept him from making a joke about billionaires slumming it in the dirt. Instead, he gave a polite nod as he passed, rake in hand. "Morning." She glanced up, offered a small smile. "You're early." He shrugged. "Garden's not going to fix itself. I brought coffee," she said, gesturing to a thermos beside her. "I figured I owe you at least that much." Daniel hesitated, then set the rake down and took a seat at the edge of the bench. She poured into 2 mismatched mugshoes, clean, his with a chip on the rim. No fanfare, just warmth between hands and the smell of roasted beans settling into the morning air. At first their conversations were light. Observations about the overrun plants, musings about which paths could be salvaged. But as the days passed, something shifted. The bench became their meeting place, an unspoken truce, a pause in their separate orbits. She began showing up in jeans and old sweaters instead of designer layers, tying her hair up with an elastic that kept slipping. "I never really liked the parties," she admitted one morning, absent-mindedly peeling the label off her coffee cup. "People think you throw a big enough party, and no one will notice you're miserable." Daniel didn't pry. He just let her speak. "After my mom died, my father turned the house into a trophy. I was 15, and suddenly everything had velvet ropes. Even me." Daniel watched her for a moment, then looked out over the garden. "Doesn't seem like you liked being on display." "I didn't," she said quietly. "But I got good at pretending I did." Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The garden hummed around them, alive in its messiness, its broken beauty. And for the first time in years, Alina Mercer wasn't alone on the bench. She was just a woman with dirt on her knees, coffee in hand, and someone beside her who didn't expect her to be anything but herself. Sophie had always been curious. Daniel knew that. But something about living in the guest house had turned her into a full-time observer. She watched everything. How the sun hit the windows of the big house in the morning, how long the sprinklers ran before shutting off, and especially how Alina moved through the garden. That afternoon, Sophie wandered down the path with a juice box in one hand and a pink plastic watering can in the other. She spotted Alina kneeling near the fountain, tugging gently at the roots of a stubborn weed. Dirt smudged her cheek, and a streak of sun lit up the copper strands in her dark hair. Sophie stood a few feet away, watching. "You missed a weed," she said, pointing with her watering can. Alina glanced up, lips twitching at the corners. "Did I? You better come help me fix that." Sophie plopped down beside her, mimicking the way Alina crouched. She leaned forward with great seriousness and began tugging at a nearby dandelion. "Why don't you wear gloves?" Sophie asked. "I like feeling the dirt," Alina said. "Makes it real." Sophie nodded like that made perfect sense. They worked side by side for a while, companionable in the kind of silence only children and people who've been lonely too long can truly appreciate. Eventually, Sophie tilted her head and asked, without malice or caution, "Why do you always look sad?" Alina froze. Not dramatically, but just enough for Sophie to notice. "I don't mean in a bad way," Sophie added quickly. "Just, sometimes when you think no one's looking, your eyes go quiet, like when Daddy stares at the old pictures." Alina looked at the little girl, then down at her own hands, still coated in soil. She didn't have an answer, not a simple one. But Sophie's gaze was so open, so impossibly kind, that the truth felt like the only real response. "I guess," she said softly. "Because sometimes it's hard to forget the things you've lost." Sophie nodded solemnly. "I lost my mommy. But Daddy says we still carry her in our hearts." Alina blinked, the air catching somewhere in her throat. "Your daddy's a smart man." "Yeah," Sophie said, standing up and brushing off her knees. "You should sit with us more. We're really good at not being lonely together." Then she skipped away, as if she hadn't just cracked something wide open. Alina sat back on her heels, staring at the space where Sophie had been. And for the first time in a long time she wondered what it might feel like to stop being alone. The swing had been broken since before they moved in. It hung lopsided from the old oak tree near the edge of the garden, one frayed rope barely clinging to the thick branch above. Sophie had noticed it on their first day, eyes lighting up like she'd found buried treasure, but Daniel had gently steered her away. "Too dangerous," he'd said. "We'll fix it soon." Soon came that Saturday morning, when the air was crisp and the sky clear, and Daniel finally had an hour without garden plans or chores pulling at him. With a wrench in one hand and new rope coiled over his shoulder, he walked toward the oak with quiet purpose. He was halfway through replacing the ropes when he noticed Alina standing a few feet away, arms crossed but smiling, her mug of tea steaming gently in the cool breeze. "You fix everything you see, don't you?" she called. He didn't look down from the branch. "Only the things worth keeping." She raised an eyebrow. "And this old thing qualifies?" Daniel jumped down from the step stool and gave the newly knotted swing a test tug. It held strong. You'd be surprised how many memories can hang from something like this. A few minutes later, Sophie came bounding out of the guest house barefoot, her curls still messy from sleep. "Is it ready? Can I ride it?" Daniel stepped back and held out a hand toward the swing. "All yours." Sophie squealed with joy and hopped on, gripping the ropes with small, eager hands. Daniel gave her a gentle push, then another, until she was soaring high enough to kick at the breeze. Her laughter rang through the garden, full and free. Alina watched, then on a whim walked over and gave the swing a playful tug from the side, causing Sophie to wobble dramatically and shriek with delight. "Whoa!" Sophie giggled. "You're gonna crash me." "Not if you steer like a pro," Alina said, eyes bright. They laughed together, the sound so natural that Daniel found himself smiling without meaning to. It was the kind of moment you didn't plan, just stumbled into and wished you could bottle. Later, Sophie climbed off and ran ahead to find her drawing pad, leaving the two adults standing side by side under the tree. "You were right," Alina said quietly. "Some things are worth keeping." Daniel glanced at her, then at the swing, still swaying gently in the breeze. "Yeah, they are." It started with a buzz. Daniel's phone vibrated against the kitchen counter just as he was pouring pancake batter into the skillet. He didn't check it right away. Saturday mornings were sacred, and Sophie was already humming her pancake song from the dining table, legs swinging in rhythm beneath her chair. Then it buzzed again, and again. A third time. He frowned, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and picked it up. 3 missed calls, a handful of texts from numbers he didn't recognize. And a link. Daniel tapped it, expecting spam or maybe a message from someone at the garage. Instead, his own face stared back at him from a tabloid website. Grainy, but unmistakable. Him and Alina, sitting close together on the stone bench in the garden, his arm resting casually behind her, her head tilted toward his shoulder, just enough to spark speculation. The headline screamed louder than the photo itself. "Heiress Alina Mercer's mystery man who's the mechanic in the garden." He stared at the screen, heart sinking, the sizzle of the pan fading behind the pounding in his ears. "Dad?" Sophie's voice broke through. "You're burning the pancakes." He flipped them absently, barely noticing. Alina was already pacing when he reached the mansion. She met him at the side entrance, barefoot and furious, a silk robe tied tight around her waist, and her phone clutched in one white-knuckled hand. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "I didn't know someone was taking pictures." Daniel held up his phone. "It's everywhere." "I know," she rubbed her forehead. "It was someone from that party the first night. They must have come back. Hid on the property. My security missed it." Daniel crossed his arms. "And now what?" "They think we're dating," she finished flatly. "Or worse, plotting something. I've already had 3 reporters call my father's office." Daniel's jaw tensed. "And me? I'm just some mechanic with a past. They'll dig." "I'm handling it," she said quickly. "It'll pass." But he didn't miss the flicker of panic in her eyes. Not just for herself, for him, for Sophie. For the fragile peace they'd built. The world had noticed them now, and it wasn't letting go. The next morning, the garden was quieterly so. The swing hung still. No hummingbirds flitted between blossoms. Even the air felt different, heavy in that way it does before something breaks. Daniel knocked gently on the mansion's side door, coffee in one hand and a folder of garden sketches in the other. No answer. He waited a beat, then knocked again, this time louder. Nothing. It wasn't like her. For the past 2 weeks, Alina had been the first to reach the bench in the mornings, usually with tea in hand and a sarcastic comment ready. But now, silence. He returned to the guest house, tried not to overthink it, but by mid-afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He texted her once, then again, both delivered. Neither answered. Finally, as the sun began to dip, he caught a glimpse of her through one of the tall windows, Alina, alone, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't look up. The following day, a note was slipped under the guest house door. Taking a few days to handle press. Please don't work in the garden until further notice. No signature. No explanation. Daniel read it 3 times. The handwriting was hers, but the tone was pure, business cold, controlled, a wall in ink. Sophie, confused, asked where Miss Alina had gone. Daniel didn't know what to say, so he lied softly. She's just busy, Bug. That's all. But he knew better. He'd seen it before, in others. In himself, this wasn't just avoidance. It was retreat. Later that night, he finally caught her near the gate, bundled in a coat despite the warm evening, sunglasses hiding her face though the sun had long set. "Alina," he called out. Voice gentle but firm. She paused, turned slowly. "Daniel, you shouldn't be out here. Why are you pushing me away?" She hesitated. "Because they're already circling. The headlines, the speculation it's starting, they'll come for you next. Your job, your daughter, your privacy. I'm trying to protect you." He shook his head. "By shutting the door in my face? I don't know how else to do this," she whispered. And with that, she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the stone path, leaving Daniel standing in the dark, coffee gone cold in his hand. Daniel didn't slam any doors. He didn't storm out or yell or demand answers. That wasn't his way. Instead, the goodbye began in small, quiet pieces. He started by folding Sophie's drawings, the ones taped to the guest house fridge, and slipping them into a manila envelope. Her shoes were lined up by the door, and he placed them carefully into a grocery bag. No rush, no drama, just calm movements with a heaviness behind them. He didn't tell Sophie yet. Not because he wanted to lie, but because he didn't have the right words. Not when she still woke up, asking if they could go pull weeds in Miss Alina's garden, or if the swing needed fixing again. He told himself it was for the best. That this world, Alina's world, was never meant for people like him. It had always been borrowed space, a beautiful, temporary pause in the middle of a hard life. And the moment the headlines rolled in, reality caught up. Alina had made it clear. She was protecting him by keeping her distance. But protection wrapped in silence still felt like rejection. On the 3rd morning, without a single word from her, Daniel stepped out to the garden early, long before the sun had fully risen. The mist clung to the ground, softening the sharp edges of everything. He walked to the bench where they used to sit with coffee and plans. He ran his fingers along the worn stone. Then, from his back pocket, he pulled out a folded sketch-a-rough plan of what the restored garden could be. He placed it gently on the bench. No note, just the drawing. Later, he boxed up the few tools he'd brought, storing them neatly by the back door. The kitchen was wiped down. Sophie's books packed. The house left cleaner than when they'd found it. Still, he hesitated. He stood in the middle of the living room, the silence pressing in around him, and whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "We weren't supposed to stay, anyway." Then he turned off the lights, shut the door behind him, and walked away from the garden, the swing, and the woman who had asked him to stay until she didn't. Alina found the envelope tucked under the flower pot on the stone bench, right where Daniel used to sit. She hadn't meant to go out that morning. She'd spent the last 4 days pretending not to look at the guest house windows, pretending not to wonder if they were still there. But something in her chest, an ache that had grown louder with each passing hour, pulled her back to the garden. The guest house curtains were drawn. No bike leaned against the porch. The swing didn't sway. The silence, once comforting, now felt hollow. She spotted the envelope as soon as she reached the bench. Her name was written across the front in large, careful letters. Crayon. Purple. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "Dear Miss Alina, thank you for letting us stay in your house. I liked your garden a lot, especially the big fountain and the birds. I think they liked you too. My daddy says not all places feel like home. But I think your garden did. It made our house feel full again. Like when Mommy was still here. I drew you a picture of the swing, so you don't forget it. It's your garden, but it was ours too, just for a little bit. Thank you for sharing. Love. Sophie Brooks, age 8. Taped beneath the letter was a folded piece of pink paper, crayon strokes bright and clumsy and full of heart. In the drawing, the swing hung straight from the oak tree, blue sky above it, and 2 stick figures sitting on a benchone with big curly hair, one with a bun and a coffee cup. Alina stared at it for a long time, blinking hard. The guilt hit like a wave, cold and fast. She had pushed them away. Daniel, with his steady hands and quiet loyalty. Sophie, with her honest eyes and open heart. They had never asked for anything. And yet, somehow, they had given her more than anyone in years. She held the note to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, Alina Mercer cried not from pressure or loss or headlines, but because she missed them, and she didn't know how to fix what she'd just broken. The house was quiet in the way. Only old houses could be every sound amplified, every shadow long and deliberate. Alina walked barefoot across the cold marble floors, her silk robe trailing behind her like a ghost. The guest house lights were still off. She had checked. Again. She wandered without purpose, past rooms filled with antiques and memories that no longer belonged to anyone living, past photographs with frozen smiles, past portraits of her father, stiff and untouched by time. She didn't want the silence. Not tonight. Her feet took her to the music room without her thinking. The door creaked as she opened it. The grand piano sat in the center, bathed in moonlight, leaking through the tall windows. Dust had gathered in the corners, the keys untouched for longer than she cared to admit. She stared at it, frozen for a moment. Then she crossed the room and sat on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant. Then, slowly, they began to move. The melody was soft-hesitant at first, like it too was unsure of being remembered. Then it unfolded, note by note, until the room filled with a low, aching sound. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Alina closed her eyes. She had written it at 17, weeks after her mother's funeral, locked in this very room while the rest of the world moved on. It was the only way she knew how to say goodbye. Her father never heard it. No one did. After that, the piano became another relic in a house full of untouched things. But tonight it was a voice, a song of loss, of longing, of questions left unanswered, of a garden once loved, of a little girl with drawings in crayon, of a man who fixed what no one else saw as broken. The final notes lingered in the air like breath held too long, then vanished into the dark. Alina rested her hands in her lap, trembling. For the first time since she was a girl, she didn't feel like a Mercer or an heiress or a problem to be solved. She just felt like a daughter. And maybe someone who didn't want to be alone anymore. The sky turned that deep, unnatural gray that made people stop what they were doing and look up. The air felt strange, humid, charged, like it was holding its breath. Daniel noticed it the moment he stepped outside the guest house, Sophie's raincoat draped over one arm. Wind tugged at the trees, and the swing twisted slowly in place. He glanced up toward the mansion, unsure if he should knock or just go. He hadn't seen Alina since the letter. He wasn't even sure she wanted to see him. Then the storm siren wailed sharp and sudden, slicing through the quiet afternoon. "Daddy?" Sophie peeked out the door behind him, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Her voice was small, worried. He crouched down to her level. "It's just a warning, kiddo. We'll drive out before it gets bad." But before they could move, the side gate opened, and Alina appeared, coat flapping behind her like a sail, hair pulled back against the wind. She looked like she'd come out into the storm before realizing it had already begun. "Don't," she called out, breathless. "The highway's shutting down. You won't outrun it." Daniel stood slowly, unsure. "Come inside," she added, softer this time. "Please." He hesitated. The wind pushed harder now, rustling branches and making the swing creak with each gust. Thunder growled low in the distance, steady and menacing. Sophie tugged his hand. Can we go with her? Daniel looked into Alina's eyes, nervous, but certain. And for the first time since she'd shut him out, he saw something else there too. Regret. Without a word, he nodded. They followed her through the side door, into the warmth of the mansion. Inside, the storm gathered against the windows like fists. Rain slammed sideways against the glass, and lightning crackled over the distant hills. But in the kitchen, the world slowed. Alina handed Sophie a blanket, and Daniel a towel, and the three of them sat in the glow of a fireplace neither of them had ever used before. It wasn't comfortable. Not yet. But it was safe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The power went out just after 7. One blink, then blackness, like the whole house had taken a deep breath and gone silent. The storm outside still roared, but inside the mansion, everything stood still. Alina lit the first candle from a drawer in the butler's pantry. Then another. Then another. Soft amber light filled the room, flickering against high ceilings and shadowed corners, making the massive space feel strangely intimate. She handed a candle to Daniel, without a word. They sat in the library now, the storm muffled by thick walls and old windows. Sophie had fallen asleep, curled up under a blanket on the couch, her bunny tucked tightly beneath her chin. Alina poured 2 fingers of whiskey into glasses she rarely used and handed one to Daniel. He took it, nodded his thanks. Neither of them spoke at first. The kind of silence that felt earned. Then, finally, Alina broke it. "I used to wish storms would knock out the power when I was little," she said, her voice low. "Just so I'd have an excuse to sit still." Daniel glanced at her, the candlelight softening her features. "You never seem like the sitting still type." "I'm not," she said with a dry smile. "That's the problem." He looked down at his glass, swirling it slowly. "You know, after my wife passed, I kept pretending things were normal. For Sophie. For myself. I went back to work 3 days later. Didn't even throw out her coffee mug. Just left it in the cabinet." Alina didn't interrupt. She just watched him, waiting. "I thought if I stayed busy, I wouldn't feel it so much," Daniel continued. "But grief isn't like that. It waits, patient. It lives in the quiet moments, in the questions kids ask when you least expect it." Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I didn't go to my mother's funeral." Daniel looked over, surprised. "She died during one of my father's acquisitions. He didn't stop for a single meeting, and she swallowed. "I told myself it was better to keep moving, that she'd understand." She looked away, ashamed. "But I don't think I've ever stopped moving since." Daniel set down his glass. "Maybe now's the time," he said gently. Alina looked at him, and in the glow of candlelight, she didn't look like a billionaire or a name in headlines. She looked like a woman who had finally run out of places to run. And for once, she wasn't alone in the dark. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Mercer estate, illuminating streaks of rain still clinging to the glass. The garden outside glistened with leftover droplets, leaves weighed down like they too had weathered something heavier than just a storm. Daniel stood in the kitchen, quietly making coffee in a sleek machine that probably cost more than his first car. Sophie was still asleep upstairs, tucked into a guest bedroom that smelled faintly of lavender and old money. He heard footsteps before he saw her. Alina entered barefoot, hair loose around her shoulders, her robe replaced by a simple knit sweater and jeans. She looked softer in the daylightless, guarded, more human. Her eyes flicked toward him, searching, cautious. "Morning," she said. He nodded. "Morning." The air between them held something different now. Not tension, not quite comfort, but something that belonged to neither of them alone. Should wait, maybe. Mutual understanding. "I owe you an apology," she said, wrapping her fingers around a mug. "For the way I handled things, pushing you away." The silence. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed but open. He didn't say anything yet. Just let her keep going. "I thought I was protecting you. And Sophie. From the media. From my life. She looked down. But I was really just protecting myself. He nodded slowly. I know. She met his gaze. I don't want you to go. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Wasn't sure we had a choice. You do, she said quickly. And I hope you'll choose to stay. For longer this time. No contracts, no garden conditions. Just stay, as long as you want. The words hung in the air like morning mist, uncertain, hopeful. Daniel took a slow sip of coffee. You sure? Alina smiled, tentative but sincere. I've never been more. Behind them, the house creaked softly in the warming sun, and somewhere upstairs, Sophie stirred, her voice sleep, muffled, calling out for pancakes. Daniel chuckled. Guess we're not going anywhere just yet. Alina exhaled, a weight leaving her shoulders. The storm had passed, and in its place, something new was beginning to grow. The sun hung high, warm and golden. As Daniel drove the spade into the earth, the soil gave way easily, damp from the storm, rich and dark-ready. Alina knelt nearby, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. Her usually pristine hands were caked with mud, fingernails ruined, but she didn't seem to care. In fact, she was smiling, really smiling, the kind that made the corners of her eyes crinkle and her shoulders loosen. They were planting the first section of the garden that morning, just past the broken fountain Sophie had once called the heart. This was your idea, Alina said, glancing sideways, as she gently eased a lavender plant into place. You should have warned me how much of it involved actual dirt, Daniel smirked. Pretty sure I assumed a billionaire knew how gardening worked. She nudged his shoulder with hers. We outsource everything, remember? Well, he said, pressing the soil down around a peony, you're doing just fine. They worked in rhythm, side by side, the silence between them filled with shovels scraping, birds chirping, and Sophie's laughter echoing faintly from where she played by the swing. It felt natural, unhurried, like they'd done this 100 times before. Daniel leaned back on his heels and wiped his forehead with his forearm. First section's in. Alina sat back beside him, inspecting their work. A modest start: lavender, peonies, rosemary, a handful of marigolds. But together they looked like a promise. You think it'll last? She asked quietly. He looked at her, not the garden, not the plants, but her. The way her eyes softened when she let herself hope. The way her voice dipped when she wasn't hiding behind certainty. I think if we keep showing up, he said, it has a chance. For a moment, neither of them moved. The breeze stirred the scent of lavender in the air. And then, without thinking, without planning, Daniel leaned in. It wasn't urgent, just simple, soft. Her hand found his, fingers curling like roots taking hold. When they pulled apart, Alina blinked like she wasn't sure it had really happened. Daniel cleared his throat, looking away. Well, she muttered, brushing dirt off her jeans, that's one way to celebrate peonies. Yeah, he said, half smiling. Just a kiss. Nothing big. They both knew it was a lie, but for now, they let it be. The next day, the garden smelled like rosemary and warm soil, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and made everything feel a little more alive. Daniel was trimming back a patch of ivy near the stone walkway when he heard footsteps behind him, measured, deliberate. Alina stood there, dressed in jeans and a white blouse, clipboard in hand. She looked composed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes that hadn't been there the day before. Got a minute? She asked. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt loop. Sure. What's up? She hesitated, then held out the clipboard. I've been thinking. About the garden, about you. He glanced at the papers. It was a contract. Formal, polished, his name typed in neat font near the top. I'd like to hire you, she said. Full-time, head of estate grounds. You'd have a team, a budget, a salary that reflects your work, health benefits even. Daniel stared at it, then back at her. You're serious? I am, she tried to smile. You're good at this, Daniel. Not just the plants, everything. You see what things can be. I need that. And I want this to be something real for you. Not just borrowed time. He held the clipboard like it might burn him. Alina, this is generous. It's more than generous, but I can't take it. Her smile faltered. Why not? Because I don't want to be on your payroll. He looked her in the eye. I don't want the susto become a transaction. She opened her mouth, but he cut her off gently. You gave me and Sophie a place when we didn't have one. You let us breathe again. But if I take this, I'm not a neighbor anymore. I'm staff. Another employee walking on eggshells in your world. Alina swallowed hard, her voice quiet. I didn't mean it like that. I know, he said. But that's what it would become. They stood in silence, the wind teasing the leaves overhead, the fountain whispering in the background. I want to be here, Daniel added. But not for a paycheck. Not like that. And with that, he handed her the clipboard and turned back to the ivy, leaving her standing there, unsure if she'd just offered him a jobor, accidentally threatened the one thing that had started to feel real. The toolbox sat on the kitchen table like it didn't belong there, like it was already halfway out the door. Daniel stared at it, arms crossed, jaw tight. The guest house was quiet. Sophie was at school, and the garden beyond the window blurred behind his thoughts. He hadn't slept much. After the job offer, after turning it down, he'd felt something shift, not just in Alina, but in the air between them. She hadn't come by the next morning. No check-in, no coffee, no quiet bench moments. Just silence, the kind that made you question whether what you had built was ever really yours. And now, the old thoughts had returned. That maybe this wasn't his place after all. That it was always temporary, a soft patch of ground never meant to hold roots. He glanced at the duffel bag near the front door. It wasn't packed yet, but it wouldn't take much. They hadn't brought much when they came. A few clothes, some photos, Sophie's art supplies. It would all fit in the truck, just like before. He walked outside, hoping the sun might help, but the garden only deepened the ache. The lavender was blooming now. The marigolds they'd planted danced in the breeze. Sophie's small watering can sat tucked beside the swing, waiting for her. Daniel sat on the bench. Their bench. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his pocket-tan ad he'd printed from the garage's old computer. A mechanic job in a small town upstate. Decent pay. No frills. No gardens. No headlines. He stared at it, running his thumb along the edge. He'd started over before. He knew how to pack fast, how to act calm for Sophie's sake, how to turn the page without reading the ending. But this felt different. Harder. Like leaving wouldn't just mean moving on, but leaving behind something unfinished. Someone. Still, the fear whispered louder. You don't belong here. Daniel looked at the paper once more, then back at the swing swaying gently in the breeze. He didn't want to run. But he wasn't sure staying meant anything anymore. And for the first time since arriving, he felt truly uncertain of where he and Sophie belonged. The black car arrived without warning. It rolled through the estate gates like it owned the road, polished to a mirror shine, engine low and smooth. Daniel saw it from the garden, crouched beside the rosemary beds, hands deep in soil. He stood slowly, wiping his palms on his jeans as the sleek vehicle came to a stop in front of the mansion's grand entrance. A man stepped out tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Daniel made in 3 months. Everything about him radiated control, precision, power. Even from a distance, Daniel knew. This had to be Alina's father. Alina appeared at the door seconds later, her voice low, tense. She didn't hug him, didn't smile. Instead, she stepped aside, letting him pass through the threshold like it physically hurt her to do it. Daniel returned to the garden but didn't work. Not really. His hands moved, but his ears stayed, turned toward the house, toward that feeling in his gut that something was shifting again and not in the good way. Later that afternoon, as clouds began to roll in over the treetops, the man came outside. Daniel looked up from a wheelbarrow full of clippings as footsteps crunched across the gravel. The man walked with purpose, pausing a few feet away, hands behind his back like a general inspecting his field. "You're the one staying in the guest house," he said. It wasn't a question. Daniel straightened. "Daniel Brooks." "Brooks?" the man repeated. "Mechanic, I'm told." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." The man tilted his head, eyes sharp. "And how long have you been involved with my daughter?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "We're neighbors. I help with the garden." "Ah," the word hung in the air, laced with polite dismissal. "And you've found your way into her home? Into her trust?" Daniel met his gaze evenly. "She invited us in. I didn't ask for anything." "People like you usually don't," the man replied smoothly. "Not at first." Something hot stirred in Daniel's chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I care about her, and Sophie and I are just trying to live our lives, quietly." The older man gave a thin smile. "Quiet doesn't last in this world, not around Alina." He turned, already done with the conversation. "She's always been drawn to broken things. Just be sure you're not the one doing the breaking this time." And with that, he walked back toward the house, leaving Daniel in the garden, heart pounding, fists clenched at his sides, wondering how many more battles he'd have to fight just to be allowed to stay. The press conference wasn't scheduled. It wasn't branded or rehearsed. It wasn't part of any campaign or corporate pivot. It was simply Alina Mercer walking out the front doors of her estate, down the stone steps, and facing the flashing cameras gathered at the gates. She hadn't stood in front of the media in nearly 3 years. But today, they were already there circling like vultures since her father's arrival, buzzing with rumors about the mechanic and the heiress, spinning half-truths into headlines that bled through every news feed. Daniel watched from the guest house, frozen on the porch, Sophie playing inside, unaware. He hadn't known she was going to do it. No one did. A staff member placed a single microphone on a stand just outside the gate. The reporters surged forward, yelling questions, flashes popping like fireworks. Alina didn't flinch. "I'm not here to answer speculation," she began, voice even but firm. "I'm here to end it." The crowd quieted, caught off guard by her presence, by the clarity in her eyes. "For years, I let others tell my story. My family, the press, investors. I stayed silent because silence was safer, cleaner." Her gaze swept the crowd. "But silence is not the same as truth." She paused, taking a breath. "Yes, Daniel Brooks is staying on this property. Yes, he helped me revive a garden I abandoned long ago. Yes, his daughter is here too. She's 8 years old, and she knows more about kindness than most of the people taking pictures of us." The reporters scribbled wildly, but Alina didn't stop. "Daniel didn't ask to be a headline. He didn't ask to be in my world. He showed up. He helped. He stayed decent when he had every reason not to be. And if you're wondering what that means to Methan, maybe you should ask why you find decency so suspicious." She stepped back, just slightly, shoulders straight. "I'm not running anymore. This is my life. My choice. And I won't apologize for the people I choose to let into it." With that, she turned and walked back inside. Daniel exhaled, still standing on the porch, heart full and aching at once. It wasn't just a defense, it was an invitation. The sun was setting low, casting long golden streaks across the uneven paths of the garden. The air smelled of earth and rosemary, and the newly planted marigolds glowed like small lanterns in the fading light. Daniel had spread an old checkered blanket near the fountain, still cracked, still dry, but cleaner now, like it had been waiting for something. A picnic basket sat beside him, filled with sandwiches, apple slices, and the last 2 sodas from the guest house fridge. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. Sophie ran barefoot across the grass, her curls bouncing as she carefully arranged paper plates in a circle. She was humming, as always, a tune she likely invented that morning. Alina arrived a few minutes later, quiet but smiling, wearing a cotton dress and no makeup. She looked like herself more than she had in weeks. When she saw the blanket and the spread, her eyes softened. "You really went all out," she teased gently. Daniel grinned. "Hey, those are premium peanut butter sandwiches. No crusts, per Sophie's request." Sophie beamed. "Crusts are for grown-ups. And weird birds." They all sat down together, the garden slowly folding around them like a forgotten dream beginning to wake. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. Sophie filled the air with stories about school, about a bug she named Walter, and how she planned to invent shoes that let you bounce like a rabbit. Alina listened closely, laughing in that warm, full way Daniel had only heard a handful of times. Eventually, Sophie drifted off, curled up in Alina's lap, the blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The night was quiet now, the hum of crickets rising with the stars. Daniel leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the sky. "You know," he said softly, "I don't need a title or a contract. I don't need to be fixed in any one place." Alina looked down at him, curious. "But," he added, this space, this time, you and Sophie, it feels like home. And if you ever need a place like that too, you're always welcome. No questions, no conditions." She didn't answer right away, just reached out, took his hand in hers, and held it like she already knew. The promise was simple, but it was enough. The kitchen smelled like vanilla cake and strawberries, and the counter was covered in pink frosting smudges, a crooked 8 candle waiting patiently beside a lopsided crown made of paper and glitter glue. Balloons were taped to chairs, streamers hung like a child's idea of elegance, and Sophie stood in the center of it all, wearing a too-big tiara and the proudest smile Daniel had seen on her in months. "Best birthday ever," she declared, hands on her hips. Daniel ruffled her hair and kissed the top of her head. "You say that every year." "Yeah," she grinned, "but this one actually is." Alina stood at the doorway, watching them with a soft smile, holding a small gift box tied with silver ribbon. She hadn't planned to stay long, just drop off her present and let them have their moment. But Sophie had begged her to stay. And Alina, uncharacteristically, hadn't said no. The three of them gathered around the cake, the lights dimmed as Daniel struck a match and lit the candle. The flame flickered, casting a warm glow on Sophie's wide eyes. "All right, birthday girl," Daniel said. "Make your wish." Sophie closed her eyes, hands pressed together, face scrunched with focus. Then she blew out the candle in one steady breath. "What did you wish for?" Daniel teased, nudging her. "You're not supposed to tell," she said, grinning. "But maybe just a hint?" Alina asked, crouching beside her. Sophie looked at both of them, then around the kitchen, the cake, the balloons, the laughter that had filled the day. "I wished," she said carefully, "for our house to stay full forever. Not big, just full, with people who don't leave." Alina's smile faltered, just slightly. The air shifted. Sophie, unaware, went back to slicing uneven pieces of cake, but Daniel caught the flicker in Alina's eyes. Something fragile, something old, a memory, maybe, or guilt, or grief. She turned away under the pretense of pouring juice, blinking a little too fast. Daniel moved beside her, lowering his voice. "You okay?" She nodded but didn't look at him. "I'm fine. It's a big wish." And she said it like she thought it could actually come true. Daniel's voice was gentle. "Maybe it can." Alina closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled. Maybe it could. But that kind of wish required more than a full house. It required a full heart. The garden was in full bloom now. Lavender lined the edges of the stone path. The marigolds stood tall and golden, and the fountain, once dry and forgotten, bubbled gently with newly restored life. It wasn't perfect. Some patches were still bare, some corners wild, but it was alive, cared for, loved. Daniel stood near the bench with his hands tucked into the back pockets of his jeans, watching Sophie chase butterflies with a net far too small for the job. Her laughter drifted through the air like wind chimes, light and easy. Behind him, the sound of footsteps over gravel. He turned. Alina was walking toward him, barefoot in the grass, her hair pulled back, a quiet calm in her eyes. She wasn't dressed up, no pretense. Just her. She stopped a few feet away, hands tucked behind her back. "I've been thinking," she said. Daniel smiled. "That sounds dangerous." Alina rolled her eyes, but her grin softened into something real. "When I first bought this place back, I thought if I could just control everything, fix the rooms, restore the garden, silence the noise, I'd feel like I had something worth holding on to." Daniel didn't say anything. He just let her speak. "But it wasn't until you showed up, until Sophie brought crayons into the kitchen, and you left tools on the porch," and the swing creaked again, "that it started to feel like more than a house." She took a slow breath. "I don't have a ring, and I'm not kneeling, but I have a question." Daniel tilted his head. "Yeah?" Alina's voice dropped, sincere and steady. "Will you build a life with me, even if it's messy, even if I still get it wrong sometimes?" He looked at her, really looked. At the woman who'd gone from guarded to open, from distant to here. Who'd let Sophie in. Let him in. Not all at once, but enough to matter. Daniel reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and smiled. "Messy sounds just right." Alina's breath hitched relief, laughter, something between tears and joy, and she stepped into him, their foreheads resting together like a promise. Around them, the garden bloomed, and so did something else. The next morning was quiet, the good kind. The kind of quiet that feels earned, wrapped in sunlight and soft breeze. Not the kind that comes after slamming doors, or things left unsaid. Daniel stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Sophie doodled stars and hearts on the back of a grocery list. The radio played something soft from decades ago, and the scent of warm batter filled the room. He didn't need a grand plan. He didn't need a timeline or titles or a blueprint for the rest of his life. What he needed was right here. His daughter's giggle as she smeared syrup on her nose, the squeak of the faucet that still needed fixing, and the way the screen door creaked open behind him like it belonged in a memory. Alina walked in wearing one of his flannel shirts over her leggings, hair damp from a shower, eyes still sleepy. "You're up early," Daniel said, handing her a mug of coffee before she even asked. "I smelled pancakes," she replied, then leaned up to kiss his cheek. "And you?" Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Are we having a normal day?" Daniel glanced at Alina, then back at his daughter. "Yep, a normal, not boring, regular day." "And are you staying?" she asked, her voice small, like she still needed to be sure. He knelt down beside her and nodded. "I'm saying yes. To the garden. To this kitchen. To pancakes with too much syrup. And to everything small that makes it feel like home." Alina leaned in the doorway, watching them, heart full. Later, Daniel would fix that squeaky faucet. He'd mow the uneven strip of grass behind the swing. He'd bring Sophie to school, stop by the garage, and pick up groceries on the way back. It wouldn't be flashy. There'd be no spotlight. Just a rhythm of laughter and coffee and shared silence. He had said yes not to a moment, but to a life, a full one. Messy and honest and deeply rooted in all the little things most people overlook. And finally, he was exactly where he wanted to be. A year later, the garden looked nothing like it had when Daniel first stood among its overgrown beds, staring down weeds and broken stone. Now, it breathed. Lavender spilled over the edges of the paths in soft waves. Climbing roses curled up the trellises like they'd been there forever. The fountain in the center, once cracked and dry, trickled with quiet joy, its soft rhythm lulling visitors into stillness. Bees hummed. Birds darted from branch to branch. Every corner felt touched by care, by purpose, by love. Daniel stood at the edge of it all, a mug of coffee in hand, barefoot in the grass, just as the sun crested the tops of the trees. He wasn't rushing off to fix someone else's car today. He had time. Sophie was inside, still asleep in the same room she'd picked out her first week here. Her windowsill now held a jungle of painted rocks and tiny potted plants, each one with a name, The guest house hadn't changed much, still cozy, still simple, but it was fully theirs now. Alina had offered the deed months ago, slipping it across the kitchen table without a word, just that look in her eyes that said, "This is yours, if you'll keep choosing it." He had. From the main house, the screen door creaked, and Alina stepped out, robe wrapped tight, hair wild from sleep. She yawned and made her way toward him without speaking, resting her head on his shoulder, his free arm wrapping easily around her waist. "Everything looks alive," she murmured. He kissed her temple. "It is." They stood there in the silence of morning, listening to the garden rustle around them. "I still have days where I don't believe it," she said. "That it's all ours. That we get to stay." Daniel turned to her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We didn't find this life," he said. "We built it, one root at a time." From inside the house, Sophie's laughter rang out clear and bright as she chased the cat through the hallway. Alina smiled, eyes glassy with quiet happiness. "It's full, isn't it?" Daniel looked around at the garden, the home, the morning light warming their skin. "Yeah," he said. "It finally is." The moving truck pulled in just after lunch. Sophie, now 9.5, and fiercely proud of the half, stood at the edge of the garden with a glass of lemonade in one hand and her other planted firmly on her hip. Her hair was longer now, wild with summer curls, and her shoes were streaked with dirt from her morning patrol of the marigolds. She watched the new family unload boxes across the gravel path, where the once-abandoned cottage beside the estate had finally sold. A boy, maybe her age, stood awkwardly beside a stack of books while his parents argued over where the lamp should go. Alina called from the porch. "Sophie, give them space. They've barely parked." Sophie looked back and grinned. "I'm just observing, for welcoming purposes." Daniel chuckled, stepping down from the porch with a fresh pitcher of lemonade and a second glass. "You planning something, kid?" "I was thinking," she said, taking the extra glass from him, "how we were the new ones once, and nobody threw lemonade at us. Let's keep it that way," Daniel murmured, amused. But Sophie was already skipping across the lawn. Alina joined Daniel at the bottom of the steps, tucking herself into his side. "She's getting brave," she said. He nodded. "She's getting you." They watched as Sophie approached the boy, holding out the lemonade and saying something they couldn't hear from this distance. The boy blinked in surprise, then nodded. Within seconds, they were sitting cross-legged on the grass, sipping lemonade like they'd known each other for years. Later that evening, as the sun turned everything golden and sleepy, Sophie came back to the garden where Daniel and Alina sat under the arbor. "They're nice," she reported. "Their names are Luca and Mrs. and Mr. Bennett. I told them about the swing and the flowers and how Miss Alina used to be scary but isn't anymore." Alina raised an eyebrow. "Did you now?" Sophie just shrugged and smiled. "I also told them that, sometimes, good things begin with just being kind." Daniel looked at Alina, both of them quiet for a beat. Then he smiled. She's not wrong. And in the heart of the garden they'd built together, surrounded by bloom and laughter and roots that finally held, they knew the truth of it. Sometimes, everything changes because someone picked up a piece of trash, poured a cup of lemonade, or stayed just a little longer than they planned.